This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Kylie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. It is rocking and rolling. There's only so many games left to go. The Eastern Conference is jam-packed with teams trying to make their way into the Eastern Conference playoff picture, and things are getting a little testy out there in the Western Conference. Top heavy, definitely, but obviously the Golden State Warriors have a lot of work to do if they want to maintain that number one seed, and we're definitely going to be talking about two teams on opposite ends of the spectrum in their respective conferences, making a push, keeping the NBA interesting. We have a great show on tap. Let me go ahead and roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, my man for www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna, PNC, my brother from another mother, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Mr. Warren Shaw. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. Things heating up down there, right?
Absolutely, man. So salute to all the fans and listeners of NBA Baseline. Great show on tap, as you alluded to. Two amazing guests. You know, we're doing it twice on this week's show. Great culture to talk about in the NBA with these two teams that we're going to be discussing. Can't wait to jump right in, brother.
Yeah, man. Everybody loves to double down. President Trump loves to double down. Steve Kerr, Greg Popovich, the NBA love doubling down. Well, we are going to double up. We have, as my man Shaw has alluded to, two excellent guests to talk about two teams that are certainly making moves as we get towards the end of this NBA regular season. In a little bit, we'll get our man Paul Garcia, contributor for Project Spurs, to help us talk about the San Antonio Spurs and what they're doing despite the injury to LaMarcus Aldridge to help supplant themselves to possibly being the best team in the Western Conference. And in a few moments, we have our girl, Allana Tauchauer. She is contributor for 16 Wins a Ring. She covers the Miami Heat. She is going to help us talk about what the Miami Heat are doing right now that might actually make us believe that they unquestionably will be one of the teams in the Eastern Conference playoffs for the 2017 season. So we got a lot on tap, a lot to discuss, and we can't wait to get our special guests on board. Once again, get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports or NBA, or get at me at GameFace Lee. We always encourage you to get at the show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on all the major platforms, available on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Player FM, Microsoft TuneIn, and also available on iHeartRadio, available on Google Music and the Roku channel. Download any one of these platforms to allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things in the NBA. You can also catch us on the 16 Wins a Ring network. 16 Wins a Ring, one of the premier websites discussing the NBA. Excellent content from excellent writers and also excellent podcasts. So be sure to go to that site and catch all the great stuff that's going on over there. Shout out to our guys Freeman and Fox, the Sports Brothers. The NBA Baseline is also simulcasted on their network as well too, Monday through Friday. So be sure to check out those guys. You know how we do, and you know how we like to roll. It's time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it
I break you down to the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Kylie Warrenshaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And this week we have a really great guest on board with us to help us talk about the rise in the Southeast. That is the Miami Heat. They are making some serious moves and certainly making the Eastern Conference playoff picture very, very interesting. And to talk about this team and what they've been doing over the last couple of weeks, we got our girl. She is a contributor for 16 Wins a Ring. She's also formerly with Chi-Town Hi-Ris, and you can also catch her on Hoops Habit. It's our girl, Allana Tauchauer. Allana, thank you so much for hopping on board with us. And I know you're in the Chi right now, so much like myself, we are bundled up with some really, really warm play by the Miami Heat so far.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me on today. It's a pleasure. I can't wait to talk some Heat hoops with you all.
All right, well, let's roll right into it, Allana. I mean, let's not, sparse any words. I want to get, when we say Miami Heat basketball, given what this basketball team endured at the beginning of this season, what they've ultimately endured from a media perspective, even from a basketball play perspective, and to finally be here with a little over 3 weeks left of NBA basketball play left to go, and we're talking about this team possibly being in the Eastern Conference playoffs. I mean, what goes through your mind when you see this kind of transition of play in less than one season under Eric Spoelstra and Pat Riley?
I mean, to be perfectly honest, I was kind of expecting this all along. I think that people were really impatient going into the season We had a lot of injuries. We had to work through a lot of new guys. Obviously, Dwayne Wade leaving us was a huge hit. But on top of that, we had some new guys coming in, and chemistry takes time, especially when you're working through such a huge roster. And on top of that, like I said, all the injuries that we had, I thought this is what they were going to do. Obviously, I didn't know that we'd go from, having an 11-30 record to where we are now, brink of playoff contention. But this is Miami Heat basketball. It's what they do. They're a grinded out kind of team. And Eric Spoelstra is an amazing coach. I think a lot of people underestimate him. They thought, oh, he only got those rings because he had the big three under him. But no, Eric Spoelstra can take any group of guys and make them to this caliber of a team.
So I think those are great points. I live in the South Florida area, so obviously I get a lot of Heat information and news, go to their games every now and then, and they preach a lot about their culture, and that's one of the things that this organization has really been prideful about over the last years, even before LeBron and Bosh had gotten to this organization. But this team, I think you alluded to a little bit earlier on. They've had injuries and they've had a lot of players that they needed to kind of figure out in terms of what the rotations were going to be. I think actually some of the injuries may have helped them because I think it limited Spoelstra's rotation some. What is your take on that to some degree? Because I think the biggest thing that's happened for this team, especially since January 1st, is obviously the play of Waiters, Goran Dragic, but Whiteside has become a less part of the offense than he was to begin the year.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point to make because I think on top of, playing good basketball, the Miami Heat do a lot of player development really well, and you can't really say that for every ball club out there. And I think that Spoelstra really knows how to utilize guys to the best of their ability, and maybe not in the most conventional ways. But even looking at someone like Rodney Magruder from the get-go, he's been a defensive powerhouse, and no one really expected that from him. And yeah, offensively, he may not be the biggest threat out there, but he brings something to the table that no one else can. And like you were saying, I think Whiteside has made such a transition from kind of being the go-to guy along with Goran Dragic. And now he's kind of saying, okay, if you want to play a different kind of ball, I'm still here for you, but I don't need to have the limelight. I don't need to be the go-to.
Allana Tauchauer joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast in our segment of The Breakdown as we discuss the Miami Heat. This is an impressive team. Allana, I want to go back a little further to what you were talking about earlier, so far in this part of the segment, because to me, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm putting words in your mouth or anything, but I can just tell in the way that you talk about this team and you're following the pulse of this basketball team. And to me, it just feels like you were very confident about this roster, despite losing Dwayne Wade, that this would be a playoff caliber basketball team. And look, if I throw out names like Luke Babbitt, right? If I throw out names like Wayne Ellington, James Johnson, Rodney Magruder, I understand the money that was thrown out to keep Tyler Johnson. I understand, the money that was thrown out to put Hassan Whiteside as one of the cornerstone pillars for this basketball team. But when I look at this roster, this roster does not, from my vocals, doesn't exude the idea that this was supposed to be a team that right now sits third in the Southeast Division and sits about a game or so behind, that last spot for the Eastern Conference playoff picture. So I got to ask you, what is it about this team that completely had you bought into the idea that they were going to be able to heed the words of an Eric Spoelstra and make this kind of run?
Well, there's several aspects to that. And I think the first and foremost was, although I do love Wade, I was devastated when he left. And I still think he made a mistake, not only leaving, but where he went. I knew that Goran Dragic would become so much better than he already was. And I know a lot of people were kind of looking to trade him, but I knew that if he was given the offensive liberty to kind of run this team and run the floor at the speed he wanted, that he'd be so much better. And on top of that, he now has a young roster to lead and to run with him. And I think Wade was really limiting him. And to go along with that, what I was saying before with player development, of course, you're not going to be able to make every guy into who you want them to be. I think Derek Williams is a great example of that. They brought him on board. He had potential, but he never really even got the chance. And for whatever reason, he didn't fit their system. They let him go. He's now doing much better on the Cavs. But for the majority of the time with the Heat, I think that players kind of develop into their own really well. And I mean, look at a guy like Tyler Johnson. He got a huge contract this summer, and he was coming from the D-League. He went undrafted, but because of the work that he put in with Spoelstra and the rest of the coaching staff, as well as just Pat Riley having a great eye, I think, for talent, he was able to become the guy he is now and get paid. And, just talking about James Johnson for a minute, because I know you brought that name up. I was a huge fan when the Chicago Bulls originally drafted him. The Bulls are not great at player development. They run a really specific system. Back in those days, it was different than it is now, obviously under Fred Hoiberg. But they have a very specific way of playing, and maybe that just didn't work out. He did pretty well in Toronto, but I was excited when they got him because I knew he could be kind of an energetic, just power player for them, and obviously he's proven his worth.
Well, I was going to throw in Allana on the idea that, listen, all you got to do is let the Chicago Bulls draft him, send him over to Memphis, because that's exactly what happened to Hassan Whiteside, and the Miami Heat will figure out a way to, do what they need to do to get these guys to start rounding out to be the NBA superstars, at least for what they're doing, to be the kind of stars that they're currently are at this particular level. So I find that very amazing that two very similar players, guys that were pretty much considered as outcasts, found their way through the Memphis Grizzlies system and then found themselves front center, putting their talents on display, being integral parts at very poignant times, interesting times with the James Johnson element and even the Hassan Whiteside element. They have been important parts helping the depth bench perspective, and Hassan Whiteside ultimately being the dominant big that he's becoming, and they're all doing it down in Miami.
Absolutely, and I think behavior and heart has a lot to do with that too. Obviously you have to be talented to be in this league, period. But the Heat really value kind of just the grind out, go-getter kind of guys that just want to put everything out there on the table and do what they have to do to win. And I think everyone on that roster has that mindset.
Yeah, and I'd have to follow up on that point. Definitely agree. I think James Johnson has been one of the bright spots for this Miami Heat organization, especially being a guy who can play make and let Dragic play off the ball a little bit. As to his assists have definitely gone up since the beginning of the season. But the other guy that has been, kind of a godsend, if you will, it has been Dion Waiters, who was averaging 14 points per game and was struggling 38% from the field, before the start of the new year. Then all of a sudden, he came back from his injury, 17 points a game, 4.6 assists, shooting 44%, very respectably from the line. But again, his playmaking has been immense. Talk a little bit about what Waiters has meant to this team and how much he bet on himself and how much money he's probably going to make this upcoming summer.
Yeah, Waiters is an interesting guy because even when I heard that they were, acquiring him, I was kind of like, okay, I have faith in the system and I have faith in Pat Riley, but I didn't know how well this was going to work out. And, he had a slow start, as did most of the roster. Obviously, that's how they got to 11-30 a couple of months ago. But I think what you kind of hit on the head there is just his confidence is unparalleled. Like no one believes in Waiters more than he believes in himself, except for the Miami Heat coaching staff. And I think that's the biggest thing. He said time and time again in interviews, he needed someone to believe in him like he believes in himself. And that's what he got here. And yeah, there are moments when I still see him make shots or take shots rather, and I'm kind of like, why are you doing this? Just pass the ball. But at the end of the day, they go in. He's a clutch player. And at this point, I'm fine with him kind of just shooting whatever he wants, because as long as he's shooting, he's going to make what he wants to make.
Allana Tauchauer joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast. Be sure to check out her awesome articles. She covers the Miami Heat and Heat Nation. You can catch her at 16 Wins a Ring. Her Twitter handle at Allana Tauchauer. Now that's the C silent, so make sure that you put Tachauer when you look for her on Twitter. Allana, look, when I look at this basketball team, look, the numbers don't jump out at you, right? They're doing all of the things I think that the analytics would pretty much be considered blasphemous to be definitive about why this basketball team is deserving to have an opportunity to be in the Eastern Conference playoff picture. Who do you believe is going to be the one that is going to help take this home for them to be in the playoffs? I mean, because one of the things that myself and my co-host Shaw and we have talked about is, to the detriment of teams like the Boston Celtics, teams like the Indiana Pacers, they did nothing to truly separate themselves to be able to put themselves and their teams and their organization in a position that could really allow you to say, when the playoffs begin, this team will do this, right? When I look at this Miami Heat team, they're one of the few teams where I could say, by them doing nothing and you just kind of riding this wave, Who knows what they're going to be like when they get into the Eastern Conference playoffs? But I got to think that they're going to need someone to get them over the top. Who do you think is going to have to be that person to take them home to get them in this playoffs?
I think that's a great question because especially when I look at this team, I think it's just such a team unity getting them where they have been. Obviously, there are top scorers and there are guys who are playing great defense for us. But in general, I think that it is such a group effort night in and night out. But if I had to pick someone, I would say Goran Dragic is probably the X factor and has been all season. He's played some of the best basketball of his career thus far. And I think he not only, has been offensively an offensive threat, but I think he's actually turned into such a great playmaker that he's making everyone around him better as well. And I think that's just kind of a new added bonus to his skill set. It's a shame that he now is out with, I think they're calling it an eye contusion. He took a pretty nasty elbow from Corey Joseph the other night, and he's out right now. But, I mean, that should heal up quickly. And I think as long as he continues to push the pace at the level he wants it to and to just be the playmaker he's developed into, that they should have no problem if they do end up making the playoffs.
So is that the reason why this team has kind of ascended in three-point shooting? They've been one of the best three-point shooting teams really since January. Is it really just attributed to the ball movement and the fact that multiple guys are now touching the basketball, like we alluded to, Waiters and Johnson helping with the playmaking as well? I guess both Johnsons, really. Is that the reason why this team has ascended in terms of three-point shooting?
Yeah, I would say so. I think there are no selfish players on this team. And even, I think a year ago, you might not have been able to say that about someone like Whiteside. He kind of had a chip on his shoulder, and I get it. He was looked over for so many years. But now it's evolved into such a team pride to be as good as they can be. They keep talking about the culture there, and I think that's a huge thing. The entire team wants to win. It's not, no one's playing hero ball anymore. And I think spacing on the floor, I think everyone just becoming a playmaker in their own right has really led to things like them being such a great three-point team.
Allana, a few questions before we go ahead and let you go. This to me is one of the more impressive things that I don't think gets discussed about the NBA, because we get too fixated on the dominance of the top-heavy teams, the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Golden State Warriors, San Antonio Spurs, and maybe to some degree we'll even throw a team like the Toronto Raptors in the mix because they've been dominant in their division for the last few seasons. But this is one of the things that I find very interesting about what has taken place in the Southeast Division. And I guess I want to point more towards the competitive level. The Charlotte Hornets should have been what the Miami Heat really ultimately would be at this particular juncture. And it's so weird because we felt like this was supposed to be a rebuilding year, even though having Hassan Whiteside and having Goran Dragic and having Tyler Johnson, that despite even the division being the way that it is, the Miami Heat was going to struggle to really figure out their identity. And I think we would give Erik Spoelstra the benefit of the doubt if the team didn't live up or play up to the level of expectations that we're currently seeing from this team. So with that being said, is it realistic that they can finish this off? Given what we're seeing from the Southeast Division, the play from the Washington Wizards, the play, from the Atlanta Hawks, is this Miami Heat team a team that can cause fits if they do make it as one of the lower seeds in the Eastern Conference playoffs, that they can knock off a 2-seeded Toronto Raptors or possibly Boston Celtics and basically be a matchup nightmare for any of these teams should they put themselves in that position?
I think a lot of it has to do with them wanting it more than a lot of other teams. And I know, that's kind of an oversell. But at the end of the day, they have so much to prove, and they are really just underdogs. And still, at this point, even though they've accomplished so much and have overcome so much this season, people are still doubting them. And I think that it's not that they don't pay attention to it, and they obviously hear all of that, but it's kind of like their mindset is so set up to just be a winning organization and have the culture of a winning franchise that for them, there's no other option than winning. They in the beginning of the season, a lot of people were talking about just let them tank. And that was never even something that had crossed, Pat Riley's mind, the roster's mind, coaching staff's mind, because that's just not what they're built for. Now, do I think they can knock off the Boston Celtics? I don't know. They've been playing really great ball lately, and they have the drive to do that, obviously. But at the end of the day, it was kind of a later half push in the season. On top of that, health has a lot to do with it. You see what happens when we're not healthy. But I mean, at this point, I think anything can happen. They're not a team that plays down to anyone, and I think that they take every competitor, at face value, and all of them are as important as the next. So, I mean, you never know what can happen, especially who would have thought they would have, come this far. So.
Yeah, and I think those are great points. Miami has a hellacious stretch, to finish up the season. They played the Pistons, they played the Cavs, they played the Celtics, they played the Wizards twice. I think the last game of the season is against the Wizards too. So, and then even in their West Coast games, they're playing teams that are all fighting for a playoff spot out west too. So they have a lot to prove. But my final two questions for you are, despite where they finished, where would you put Eric Spoelstra in the Coach of the Year voting? And I know you alluded to a little bit earlier on, but are you more surprised by them? And it doesn't sound like you are, but which team has been more surprising in terms of their turnaround, Dallas or Miami?
I guess to answer your first question, I think that Eric Spoelstra definitely deserves at least to be highly considered, if not just flat out get Coach of the Year. I mean, like you were saying, I'm not all that surprised in their performance, just because I don't think that their record ever indicated their talent at the beginning of the season. But to see him turn around, a bunch of basically D-leaguers, and I don't say that, in any negative way, but guys who went undrafted, went unnoticed, and had to really prove themselves to be what they are right now, I think is amazing. And I think, once again, he's been overlooked just because he did have such a great, group of guys in the big three and whatnot getting those championships, but he deserved way more credit to put together what he did, and especially looking at what he could do now. I think he definitely at least deserves to be highly recognized. And in terms of, comparing to other teams, my eyes are on the Miami Heat. I think that other teams definitely deserve. Yeah, I mean, I can't lie. I'm biased in this. Other teams, like the Dallas Mavericks, they've done what they could do. But I do think the story of this year for the league are definitely the Miami Heat.
All right. Well, let me put it to you like this. If there's ever a Twitter handle that I need for Allana to hold down, you might have to go run and take care of this before someone scoops this up. Heat Hiress. That needs to be your Twitter handle moving forward.
I don't hate it. I don't hate it.
You don't hate it at all. Listen, she covers the Miami Heat like no other. We definitely would love to get you back on, especially if this team does the improbable, to what many people might be saying, especially given where they were at the beginning of this season and find themselves playing in the Eastern Conference playoff picture. Our girl, Allana Tauchauer, you can catch her on 16 Wins a Ring. She provides excellent content discussing basketball, mainly the Miami Heat. You can also catch her on Hoops Habit. Allana, thank you so much for shedding the light and actually getting Shaw and we got our surfboards ready. It's time that I think we might have to start riding that heat wave as well too, girl.
Hey, there's plenty of room here and on Waiters Island. I mean, it's always breezy.
Our girl, Allana Tauchauer. Be sure to check her out on 16 Wins a Ring. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Breakdown. Time now for The Drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. This week on The Drop, our topic of conversation is the team that we constantly keep saying, man, they are just uber consistent. They just go with the flow. But the flow suddenly has them rising in the Western Conference. All things considered, this very well could be the team that might be the top dog in the Western Conference. And to talk about the San Antonio Spurs and the late run that these guys are making and the impressive show of basketball play, especially since the NBA All-Star Weekend, we got our man. He is contributor for Project Spurs. He's also rolling with a new site called Analyzing the League. Our man, Paul Garcia. Paul, thanks for hopping on board with the Baseline, man.
How's it going, guys? Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to talk about the Spurs and also some of the stuff that I'm promoting over at ATL as well.
Definitely. So the website is called Analyzing the League, and you can catch it www.analyzingtheleague.com. Paul, I want you to take a moment to talk a little bit about what the website entails and why exactly is it that you decided to put yourself into doing this project, into having this website available to the NBA fans.
Sure. So last summer in Las Vegas, during when the summer league was going on, there's this thing called the Scout School by a guy who used to be a former NBA scout, and now he's like kind of player development, coaching development kind of personnel, and he knows a lot of NBA personnel, GMs, front office people, scouts. And so I attended this conference. It was for 2 days, and it was really interesting. Where we got to talk to the Cleveland Cavaliers scout. He showed us some of the plays that they used to break down against the Golden State Warriors and coming back from that 3-1 deficit. We talked to Trajan Langdon, one of the Brooklyn Nets GMs currently. We talked to a Dallas Mavericks scout. So there was really this cool experience of experiencing what goes on in front offices, how the scouting works internationally, just locally with the colleges. And so, writing for Project Spurs, it's a great experience, but my main focus there is obviously just the Spurs. So I'm only worried about their players, their international players, and then on a night, the Spurs don't play every single night during the NBA season. So I said, how can I use some of this knowledge and kind of further my broader understanding of basketball? And so what I did was I created, I talked to our co-founder of Project Spurs, Michael DeLeon, and I asked him, what can I do to start getting a website together where I can just put my general NBA thoughts. And so we came up with analyzingtheleague.com. It's just barely in its infancy. We had just launched it back in November of this past of 2016. And so what it does is there's all sorts of ways that it goes. There's play breakdowns from any different NBA teams. There's roster charts and depth charts. There's some free agency news, like when Andrew Bogut was trying to figure out where to sign. I wrote a piece about where he should sign, where I felt best, which was the Cavaliers, I thought, at that time, and sure enough, he did sign there. I was following the trade deadline. So there's just a lot of different things, and I'm going to keep it going so that, whether San Antonio goes to the finals or they don't, at least I for myself still have something to contribute to the general NBA audience, not just Spurs focused only.
I think that's amazing. Anytime somebody is an entrepreneur and can kind of get some side off on their own, if you will, especially in today's market and in the sports environment as well. It's difficult, but kudos to you and what you've been able to do with this website, and we definitely will be supporting. And I've already checked it out. You got some great graphics up there already. So how kind of a side note, are you doing those graphics on your own, or how are some of those things coming about?
Yeah, actually, my girlfriend gets some credit there. She's actually she has some good depth of just working with graphics and making like charts and different types of promotional things. And so she's kind of taken that and helped me out with some of those things. Some of the video stuff that I do on my own, the charts as well. But yeah, she's definitely helped me out in that department as well. So it's kind of like both of us running it, even though I'm the guy who writes a lot of the pieces for it. But she really does a lot of support on the other end. She even works with me on the social media side of trying to get the Twitter account.
God, that's amazing.
Team Garcia.
Guys got he and his girlfriend running a basketball website. That's really dope. Yeah.
So wait a second, Paul. I got to know. So who is Popovich and who's Buford on this project? I'm just curious. Who's rolling like Popovich? Who's rolling like Buford between the both of you guys?
I guess I'm like Pop, like I'm more out there, like just like whether it's nice or mean, and then she's like RC doing all the stuff that's like underrated where it doesn't really get noticed, but still making the website go.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and let's talk Spurs. First of all, I gotta make mention of this because when I think about the San Antonio Spurs and I think about what they've just recently done to the Golden State Warriors, despite all of the superstar players not being on the basketball court, but when you look at what this team, you have a pinned tweet, right, where it says the Spurs in the last six first quarters get outscored by an average of 30.7 points per every 100 possessions. And I'm thinking, like, did he not see what happened to this basketball, like what he just did to the Golden State Warriors? I'm like, man, you need to take that pinned tweet off of your page. So let's get right into it, man. Look, going all the way back to the All-Star weekend, these guys are playing at such a high level. And I'm not talking about this from depending on Kawhi Leonard, who is having an MVP type of season, no doubt, but 1 to 12 in the roster. And even the stragglers hanging off on the ends of the bench are coming in and contributing for Greg Popovich, who clearly has a nose for these things, so much so he's got to have a Band-Aid over it while he's coaching. Paul, you got to talk to me about what the Spurs team is doing, man, that has ascended them to possibly being the top team in the Western Conference.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be lying if I said it was projected. Actually, maybe I am lying. So check this out. Before the season started, back in October when the schedules come out, I had printed their schedule at work, and I've been putting this update every month. And I had just went through their season, and I kind of just thought of like obvious wins, obvious losses. and I ended up coming out with 66-16 as their projection, just from my personal what I thought of what the team. And that was without seeing Gasol, without seeing some of these guys, some of these new guys, David Lee. This is obviously without Tim Duncan, but for me, I'm just so ingrained with knowing that they're going to win 50 games that I kind of just set that expectation of who are they pretty good against, with just still the core of this team there in place with Kawhi and LaMarcus and Tony and Manu. So I ended up coming out with 66-16. Well, right now, as of 65 games through the year, they're on pace for 64 wins. So I'm off by just two games. And it's crazy though, because like that's a huge expectation. Because Vegas, their odds were only to win 57 games this year, and obviously if they win 64, they're 7 games over that. You really just have not seen any type of struggle from them. Early in the year they were barely winning ball games, but that's the key, is they were winning ball games. When they were trying to get Powell into his role and fit in some of these new pieces, Danny Green missed like the first 10 games. Tony Parker started missing a few games here and there. And then, even when they're struggling, like what you saw about my tweet, in their past 6 games, they had been down by almost 13.5 points a game, like start digging themselves in some holes. But they went 5-1 during that stretch. I mean, they were down 28 to Sacramento, and they ended up coming back and winning that game. They were down 16 to the Rockets all last week. So it's even like when they're struggling, they're still doing really well as far as like the win column goes. I mean, it's just been like we mentioned R.C. Buford earlier. He's just, I don't know what he does as far as his scouting department. They're just, they're incredible in what they've done. They've taken somebody like David Lee, who looked like he was on the fringes of being out of this league, and just turned him into a really, really good role player where he can earn himself a really nice contract this summer if he doesn't stay in San Antonio. A guy like Dwayne Dedmon stayed, signed on for a very low amount. And now he could be a guy who gets, anywhere north of $12 million if he decides to test the free agent waters. Paul Gasol is obviously very happy where he's at, and he's going to be earning $16 million next year. So they just put it, and then Patty Mills, is obviously coming to free agency. So they've put a really, really good team around them, and the number 1 defense in the NBA yet again, and yet without Tim Duncan, that's what's key right here. And then also the 5th most efficient offense in the league. So they're really in prime position, as you said, as long as they're healthy, to make a run, toward the finals in June.
Well, and I think that's exactly what we're going to discuss now in terms about them being healthy, because a lot of what the Spurs do is culture related. A lot of, you use the term plug and play a lot with this team in terms of a guy can just go down, another guy is going to be the next man up. But big question now with the case of LaMarcus Aldridge and his heart arrhythmia, we don't know too much about this just yet, and we don't want to speculate as to how long he's going to be out. They've deemed him out indefinitely as of the weekend. But is this a team that can still push forward in the NBA playoffs without LaMarcus being a key part of what they do?
As far as okay, so we're saying if let's just say he's not available for the playoffs. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Yeah.
I honestly think just round one's maybe the most they can get out of. Maybe somebody like if they were to get the 1 seed, somebody like Denver, they could probably still be with just Kawhi and the supporting cast that they have. Maybe somebody like OKC or Memphis, but I really doubt that too. That would probably be a 7-game series where it's a coin flip whether they win that. Even though his stats aren't in San Antonio, we haven't seen the LaMarcus that you were used to seeing in Portland. He just you pull up any clip from 2 years ago in Portland, and the guy just looks like he has this big old jolt of energy. He's so confident. He's afraid. He's not afraid to get into people's chests, just bump into people. Try to draw fouls and these things. And it just comes from where you kind of look at where his role is kind of diminished here as far as the offensive output, but he still does so much more that you don't see on the stat sheet. It's just 17 points a game, but still those are really efficient 17 points that the Spurs need night in, night out. If Kawhi's getting double teamed or something, there's LaMarcus right there as another option. Defensively, he's been really good as far as switching out on wing players to mess up pick and rolls for opposing teams, protecting the rim a little bit here and there with Dedmon and Powell. So those are the kind of things that you're really going to miss with LaMarcus long term as far as the playoff series would go. And that's why I think that it would still be too much on the shoulders of Kawhi. Teams would put a scheme together to double team him, and I don't know if there's a supporting player available that can kind of carry the load offensively with losing LaMarcus.
Paul Garcia joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast. Our segment of The Drop is we're talking Spurs basketball, the impact of LaMarcus Aldridge, his injury, and what the current Spurs roster team is doing at this particular point. I mean, obviously, as we're recording this podcast, Paul, this basketball team is I think is a half game or maybe a game out from possibly being the top seeded team in the Western Conference with so many games left to go. I want to kind of dial back a moment back to the game that did take place between the Spurs and the Golden State Warriors. And, you move all of the superstar pieces to the side on this chessboard. And I'm looking at this roster that the San Antonio Spurs have. and it replicates exactly what the Golden State Warriors have had the luxury of having over the last 2 seasons to put themselves in a position to play in the NBA Finals, which is having a very deep, effective lineup, so that when guys like LaMarcus Aldridge goes down, having a David Lee, a Bertrand, who's like this meteor that's come out of nowhere from San Antonio and is lighting up the 3 ball. Jonathan Simmons, Patty Mills. I mean, and it just goes on. And like, you stop short of like 3 or 4 players for the Golden State Warriors, and you say to yourself, man, if the San Antonio Spurs had the opportunity to play the Golden State Warriors in the first round, that might actually be the best outcome if it gives the Spurs an actual opportunity to play in the Western Conference Finals. With that being said, how critical is this for Greg Popovich to lean on what Patty Mills has been doing for this basketball team while Tony Parker is trying to kind of get himself together to be ready to make this final run?
I think it's been huge for both the Spurs and Patty individually. Like I mentioned earlier, this is his contract year. A few years ago, after they won the title in 2014, he was expected to be a big free agent that summer. Well, then he had a tear in his shoulder, so it kind of brought his value down. So they kind of got him on a bargain value, the Spurs, and getting him back for another 3 years. But now his summer's coming up. Him and his agent are looking toward this summer. He showed last night. If I'm an option, that maybe the second or third option on a team, I can probably put up some good stats, and keep the course afloat. And then for Pop, what he's done for the Spurs is he's like you said, he's given the Spurs another luxury at the point guard spot, so that Tony can have nights off for rest. Tony doesn't have to play 4 quarters of basketball; he can play maybe 3 quarters. If he's feeling it, Pop will put him in the 4th quarter. If not, he'll just sit him and let Patty finish out the game with the starters. And Patty's brings that element of that fireball type of energy and mentality where he's kind of hounding guys on defense. He's constantly moving all over the floor. He doesn't sit still. He's still not your natural point guard where he makes the right passes or gets to the free throw line or gets a layup, but he's just such a deadly shooter, so that anytime Kawhi gets doubled, anytime LaMarcus gets doubled, there's Patty right there for a spot up open 3. He's really good at those transition 3. So he's really brought depth to that backcourt for Pop, where Tony is getting up there in age, but it's also, I think, in the long term, it's going to help Tony come April and May because he's going to be a little bit fresher. He'll have the legs, and if he doesn't have it going, Pop has that second option of letting Patty finish out games.
So you bring up some great points, especially when alluding to Tony Parker. They know Tim Duncan retired last in the summer as well. Manu Ginobili is going to be a free agent. Is this kind of the last incarnation we're going to see of kind of the old Spurs regime? Is it really now, next year, you're really going to see LaMarcus and Kawhi and I guess Powell, and I guess in his final year, really kind of take this team into the next level of their success for the upcoming decade?
Yeah, I think this really is probably it, because the expectation is most likely, he hasn't said it, and he actually looks like he can still play another year, but Manu actually, everyone thinks here in town that Manu probably is going to retire, even though he's actually still playing very well for his age and his minutes that he gets. Tony's the other big is the key. He still has a few more years on his deal, and they have this really, really bright kid named DeJounte Murray, who's just sitting there right now waiting. He's only 20 years old. Kid is super talented. I mentioned that scouting conference last year. Well, I had at that conference, they talked about Murray and how he was a kid who was, should have been a lottery pick. And there was just something that draft picks, there's just a red flag in certain players, no matter how talented they are, that there's some sort of red flag there. And so apparently he had a red flag. I don't know if it was for something in his personal life or what's going on there, or maybe it wasn't a health concern or anything. But that was the reason why he actually fell later in the first round, to where the Spurs were able to grab him late in the 20s. So Murray is a kid who has all-star potential. In a few years, he's got all the. He was mentored by Jamal. Is it Jamal Crawford? Is that the guy with the Clippers?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. So he's mentored by Jamal Crawford. He's a Seattle kid, Seattle product. Really has a good one-on-one attack game. Very, very talented. Could prosper into either a really good point guard or 2 guard in this league. 6'5". So it feels like they need to get that. They need to get Murray a consistent role next year. Whether it's coming off the bench and being that Patty Mills if Patty Mills takes off to free agency, or whether it's giving Murray the starting job and bringing Tony and making Tony like their 6th man. So I really think that Tony's going to have to kind of change his game a little bit next year, where it's going to be even more, where he's going to have even more reduced role than he already does have right now. And so I think that, yes, this is the last iteration of those type of Spurs with Tony and Manu together.
Paul, I want to follow up on Shaw's point, because now my question to you would be do the Spurs splurge to keep Patty Mills, knowing that they have this young phenom in the weights with the DeJounte Murray?
That's the big question that a lot of
Because
fans
remember
here
now,
in town
I'm talking about this in relation to the fact of what happened with Corey Joseph. I feel like the Spurs had something at the time, kind of like a three-headed monster, so to speak, having that flexibility while Tony Parker wasn't quite Tony Parker, but having Corey Joseph and Patty Mills on their roster really made them a dangerous lineup. And I think had they figured out a way to keep Corey Joseph, probably would have extended even last season if they had a Corey Joseph on that team, could have probably put themselves in a better position against the more athletic teams that they just can't seem to get past whenever they get into the playoffs. But I feel like if there's an opportunity to keep a guy like Patty Mills while having a guy like Dejounte Murray, can that be done, and should it be done if it's the San Antonio Spurs?
It can be done financially, but I just don't know if they're going to take that as far as like they're very, very, it's hard to tell because, they're very, very obligated, have a very strong relationship with Manu and Tony. So, Tony's still going to make $15 million a year. Do you really want him to be reduced to that third point guard or even second option? While giving Patty a huge contract, keeping him around for 4 years. Plus, you have Murray here for the long term as well. So it comes down to are they willing to make Tony kind of their third guy and have him be like that that last option? Because you got to, like I said, you got to groom Murray. He's too talented to just have on the bench for another season. He'll be 21 next year. And then Patty, I think it also comes down to what figure is he getting in this market. Somebody like Brooklyn or Philly going to throw some big money at him, north of like 12 to 14 million, because then that's where San Antonio has to start thinking, are we going to be really committing like almost 20 grand and 20 million in salaries just to, or maybe even 30 actually, to 2 point guards, and then where we have 3, then we don't really want to play the older one. So that's kind of a question coming this summer. Also, they have to look for Dwayne Dedmon. He's a guy who's probably going to opt out of his deal, and he's really going to be worth a lot. And I feel like long term, he has more value to them at that big man spot as a defender, as a guy who fits in with Kawhi and LaMarcus more so than what they could groom Dejounte to become.
Fair enough. So we talked about a lot of the young guys on this team, but one guy we haven't really touched on is Kyle Anderson. Where are you with his overall development on this team? A lot of people have compared him to I think it was Boris Diaw light, if you will, when Diaw was still on this roster. What about Kyle Anderson do you like, or do you like his game, and how is San Antonio developing his young talent?
I just hope he doesn't grow out like Boris Diaw. Like that's because then that's not Boris Diaw light. That's gonna be Kyle heavy right there. So we don't. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Paul.
It's all good. So Kyle's an interesting story. Coming in, so last year they sent him to Summer League, and you're right. He was actually projected to play like Boris Diaw. They made him the 4 in Summer League for a few games to kind of give him that role, get him comfortable with that spot. So coming into the season with Boris getting traded to Utah, the expectation was, yes, Kyle's going to be our backup 4, be that Boris Diaw type of guy. Well, then it turns out Danny Green ended up getting hurt in training camp, and so they actually had to start Kyle for those first 10 games at the 2 guard. So he was playing out of his position at the 2, and of course, he's not a good shooter. He's not a great perimeter defender, so he didn't look well with the starting group and to start the season. Well, what ended up happening though, that something that the team didn't expect, was that David Lee ended up taking off with that second unit in that Boris Diaw spot. So David Lee started playing so well that when the team got 100% healthy in mid-November, Kyle really had no role, and to this day he still has no role. So really, we haven't seen what he projects into, if he's going to develop into what he needs to become. He's still young. He's maybe like, I think 23 or 24, but there's no role for him right now, and that's kind of what it comes down to. Is Lee this summer gonna opt out of his deal and sign elsewhere, or else re-sign in San Antonio? It looks like he would want to re-sign in San Antonio. He really likes the role he has here. He really enjoys this team. So then that would be another season where Kyle still doesn't have a role. And they have him on the books for one more year next year to try to develop him. If not, they'll lose him the following summer. So for honestly, there's just no role right now, and I don't see a role either next year, because we mentioned Bertans as well. He's a little bit more talented long term than Kyle, and he's also younger. He's only 23, and it feels like next year they need to get him also an increased role.
Well, that all makes some sense to me in terms of what they're trying to do with this roster. And this Spurs team isn't one that typically overspends. They don't bring in people that don't mesh with their culture, if you will. But with that said, is there anybody, and I know you may not have all the free agents and things like that in front of you right now, but is there a guy out there that you think that will need to be added to this roster to continue the success, or will LaMarcus and Kawhi be enough to kind of bring this team into the future with Dejounte Murray?
I think there's got to be, I don't know who it is, but there's got to be some sort of backup 2 or 3 slasher kind of guy, a guy who can kind of draw the defense in a little bit. You're right. I don't have the free agency list in front of me. I was actually making one earlier, just looking at some players, and there's not a lot of them out there.
Right.
It's got to be somebody because I feel like if Manu does retire, maybe Jonathan Simmons either walks in free agency or he resigns. Simmons still hasn't developed into being that guy who's gonna. I think the Spurs kind of wanted him to become the next Manu as far as like being that guy off the bench who kind of draws fouls, gets the pick and roll going, and he's just still really, really inconsistent. To this day. So I feel like that's the spot that they got to look after as far as if Manu does retire, is getting who's that backup wing, and especially if Patty walks as well in free agency. Is it going to be DeJounte Murray? And that's a lot for a second-year player. Or is there a free agent out there? So I really feel like if they do need to make a move in the summer, it's to get one of those type of players. But even them, right now, they're only going to have maybe like $10 million cap space, which is obviously in this summer is not a lot of money.
All right, a couple questions before we let you go here, Paul. Paul Garcia joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast. Paul, realistically speaking, with this Spurs basketball team, what is the only thing that's going to hold them back from actually us saying with conviction and fervor, the San Antonio Spurs need to do this to find themselves playing in the NBA Finals for 2017?
This is assuming Marcus is obviously getting healthy when the playoffs start. I would say that just finding out what is their best group to score points when they get into these instances where they can't score. They go through these really tough stretches, even when they're healthy, where it's almost like if Kawhi doesn't have it going, or they're doubling Kawhi and getting the ball out of his hands, who's the next guy that steps up? It should be LaMarcus, but a lot of times it doesn't work out that way. They have Paul Gasol. But then he becomes a defensive liability. So I feel like it reminds me very much of last year's team that lost to Oklahoma City in those last 4 games against OKC. They really strangled their offense together. It wasn't necessarily their defense that they couldn't stop OKC. It was their offense. They just couldn't generate points against those lineups. Somebody like Andre Roberson was really good defending Kawhi. So I feel like who is going to step up? Do they have those players to step up when the shots need to be made outside of Kawhi? That's going to be my big question going into the playoffs.
Well, it's death, taxes, and the Spurs is what I always say when it comes to the NBA. And do you see this team, just, again, all things being equal, are they hoisting the NBA championship, bleeding the Golden State Warriors, beating whoever else they need to be in the Western Conference, and probably ultimately beating the Cleveland Cavaliers? Is that what you see for this team ultimately?
I'm going to say still to the, I picked Cleveland to win the finals this past summer, and I did pick the Warriors as well. I would say I think I can see San Antonio beating Golden State. I cannot see them beating Cleveland though at 100%. That I'm still going to stick with that. I just don't see it still to this day from San Antonio as far as, like I said, who takes the torch from Kawhi when he really needs help. And I don't know if there's a player right now that's consistently going to do that for them.
Wow. I'm telling you, man, if there's ever a time to have a website called Analyzing the League and it be headed by our man Paul Garcia, this would be that time. He has a new website up, www.analyzingtheleague.com. The Twitter handle @ATLEAGUE_NBA, ATLeague_NBA. You can also catch him on Twitter @Paul Garcia NBA, writer for Project Spurs. Paul, man, we so appreciate you hopping on board and for giving us your confident vote that the San Antonio Spurs may actually do it this upcoming season, man.
Oh, thanks a lot, guys. It was a great opportunity. It's always a fun time talking with you guys.
All right. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Drop.
Coast to coast. Coast to coast.
Time now to go coast to coast discussing the news in the association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's rock.
All right. Big shout outs to our man, Dirk Nowitzki. He is the German sharpshooter. He hits 30,000, one of only 6 NBA players to achieve this accomplishment. I don't think there's any question that he is by far the best international shooter in NBA history.
Right, and I think that kind of transcends even that, title, if you will. He's moved into one of the best players in NBA history altogether, whether he's from Europe, big man, or whatever it is. So congratulations to Dirk. I know you saw his shooting coach. A lot of was made about that on Twitter and on social media about him crying and seeing his protege reach 30K in terms of points scored.
You know what that also means too, right? He'll probably be the governor of California probably by 2025.
Dirk's got swag, man.
Hey,
I wouldn't put it past him.
Hey, listen, if you have David Hasselhoff as your constituent supporter, it goes along. Hey, Baywatch is coming out this summer, bro. You know what I'm saying?
I'm unfortunately
with
aware.
The Rock and Efron, you know what I mean? Like, you know, so big things happening, boy. Whipping out the big guns. So Dirk Nowitzki had to hit 30K before the show's the movie is released. So there you go. All right, let's go on and talk about current NBA news happening as well. J.R. Smith makes his return to the Cleveland Cavaliers, and obviously not a moment too soon. Cleveland Cavaliers, after a 3-game losing streak, and so much controversy amid whether or not this basketball team is ready to make their repeat to defend the championship. So I'm sure it was very much welcome that J.R. Smith is back on that basketball court for the Cavs, especially for LeBron James.
Yeah, dual fold, I think, in terms of him just getting his legs back, and then, you know, the fact that they want to rest LeBron and Kyrie a little bit more as well too. So JR is a guy who can go out there and carry the offensive load once he gets up to speed. So great to see him back. He's had a rough year after having such a great summer. You know, his baby was born prematurely, and you know, had to deal with that situation, and obviously dealing with his own injury as well. So hopefully JR has a great comeback this NBA season.
All right, now the Pelican brief returns. Omri Caspi, who had broke his hand, and within a day of him being traded from the Sacramento Kings to the New Orleans Pelicans and then getting released, he gets released, and then he breaks his hand, then gets released, is somehow ahead of schedule. But I gotta ask you this question, Shaw. Ahead of schedule to what exactly?
Well, some teams are looking to maybe, you know, bring him into the fold if they need some outside shooting, especially if you're a playoff team looking to make a last-minute push, or a team trying to get into the playoffs, if you will. And he can shoot it. So if he is able to help you even for the last 5 games or so, those last 5 games may make the difference to you making the playoffs or not. So I think for him too, he just wants to make sure that he's back, and you know, he can hopefully build on getting a great contract this upcoming summer.
All right. Interesting news in New York, like there isn't ever. And I really just thought we were done talking Knicks. Like, they really have no business being discussed on the Baseline NBA podcast, or any podcast for that matter, until at least the offseason happens. But somehow Phil does it again, boy. This man, like, obviously just triangle till I die. Somehow he finds his way down on the basketball court and is actually teaching the Knicks guards the triangle offense with like 16 games remaining in the season.
It's absurd. You know what I mean? As you said, triangle to die.
What's absurd is you actually posted this for us to announce this on our show. That's what's absurd.
It just goes to show you just what, you know, how dedicated he is to it, and kind of the fallacies that he's even said, where we don't need to be triangle heavy, but now here he is, you know, like you said, 15 games left in the NBA season. Next season is pretty much lost, and he's going out there and trying to give them the intricacies of the triangle offense. There's a lot of supporters out there for it, but there's more detractors at this point in terms of the style, because it takes a certain personnel for you to be able to run that offense and run it effectively. The Knicks don't have that. So Phil going out there just being Phil. I don't know how Derrick Rose is taken to it, but I thought it was an interesting news note.
Listen, man, this is it. Cowspiracy theory. This is my utter belief. Phil the triangle offense is no longer a system in the NBA. It is an actual religion. And Phil Jackson is the pastor. Phil Jackson is leading the movement for the triangle. You think I'm joking? We talk about the Illuminati. I'm telling you, the triangle is now a religion, and Phil Jackson is your most devout disciple. He will teach the masses. And that's just how I personally feel. All right, let's keep it moving. Yes, all right. Markelle Fultz, highly touted and highly sought after. He announces that he is planning to go pro. Is this a premature move, or is this actually a sound move by the young phenom?
I think he had to. I mean, we all know, we've been talking about him and Lonzo Ball from UCLA. Those two guys are consensus top 2 picks, no matter how you put them. His team, Washington, is probably not going to make the tournament, so he's making his announcement a little bit early, you know, as a result of it. But either way, man, I can't wait to see this guy ball. Can't wait to see him play in summer league as well. Hopefully, there's no setbacks one way or the other, because you know we've had that the last couple of seasons with some of these top 5 selections, guys going down, and now we're not getting to see them in their first year. Hopefully, that nothing like that happens to Markelle Fultz, and we get to see him play.
Yeah, hopefully we don't jinx him, but we'll definitely get more in depth about that when we do our baseline NCAA edition upcoming this week, discussing the NCAA tournament and the possible prospects that we should be looking out for during the tourney. So I'm really excited for us to be able to do that show. And finally, Shaw, there's an announcement by Ice Cube and the Big Three League. It will officially take place in June. I think you said June 25th is when the league will start. All right, man. So listen, was it Devin DeRay or, DeRay? I forget what that dude's name is. They got hip hop squares on VH1. That's going to be
D-Ray Davis.
D-Ray Davis, yeah, DD. They displaying hip hop squares, and the NBA finally going to have their Big Three League in June. Things are happening in the hip hop culture, brother.
Yo, Ice Cube is paid, man. I mean, at the end of the day, this he's making movies. He's created a basketball league. He's got to have a new show on VH1, as you alluded to. Shout out to Cube and what he's been able to do. Continue to forward the culture, if you will. But I'm excited about the Big Three League. It's really going to be a kind of like a traveling tournament, if you will. And it's going to be kind of like bringing like a Super Bowl weekend feel to each stop that they have. New York is going to be the first stop. I'm sure LA will obviously get one. All the other stops in between, we don't know yet. But, great names that we've all heard of. Allen Iverson's going to be out there leading a team. Even Jermaine O'Neal, Bonzi Wells, some blasts from the past. So I'm excited to see what this league is. Hopefully we'll be able to get one of the representatives on our show at some point this year too.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get an opportunity to actually go out there and see these guys ball.
Oh, you got to go cover that Brooklyn game June 25th, man. I think you need to hit that up.
Sounds like I'm going to have to figure out a way to make that happen then. All right? If you believe so, I need y'all to throw out the tweets at Game Face Leads, put my name out there. Let's start a movement. Let's say, we need to get the baseline out there covering the Big Three League, because that's what needs to happen. All right? I guess no response. So clearly Shaw's not backing me on this one.
I said 100. I said 100 a couple times. So, okay. For sure, definitely. I think, again, I hope they come to Miami, because I definitely want to check it out. I have intentions of going to Vegas Summer League this year as well too. So I don't know if they'll be in Vegas, but I think it's going to be a great product, and I'm anxious to see how everything plays out for the Big Three.
Most definitely. Well, what a awesome show that we've had this week, Shaw. I mean, I can't tell you, man. It's always great when our show is actually filled with great guests who have great content, discussing great things about what good teams are doing, Miami Heat and the San Antonio Spurs. So I think it's just been awesome to have Allana and Paul on board with us this week, brother.
Yeah, two great individuals who definitely know their stuff about their respective teams and the NBA at large. And I think this episode was really about culture, with these two teams that have a great culture in place and have a history of winning. I mean, although the Miami Heat aren't as up as they used to be, or as maybe they would have expected to be, they're definitely making a push, and San Antonio continues to be the juggernaut that they always are. So I think it was a great conversation. I hope everybody tunes in and enjoyed what we had to bring this week.
Most definitely, brother. So once again, we'd like to thank our special guest, Allana Tauchauer. Be sure to check her out. She's always doing her thing on 16 Wins a Ring. Our man, Paul Garcia. He's a contributor for Project Spurs, but also check out the new website, www.analyzingtheleague.com. Definitely good stuff happening there. For the baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do. We'll catch up with you next time.